There are three big events happening tomorrow that could make for a rather chaotic weekend. You want to know what they are?
Yeah.
Tanks will be rolling through the nation's capital, along with 7,000 marching soldiers to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States Army. There will also be No Kings demonstrations around the country to protest Trump. And it happens to be his 79th birthday. What a coincidence. Here's what Trump had to say about anyone who wants to rain on his parade. Watch.
And we're going to be celebrating big on Saturday. We're going to have a lot of, and if there's any protester who wants to come out, they will be met with very big force. I haven't even heard about a protest, but, you know, this is people that hate our country. But they will be met with very heavy force.
Clarify what kind of protest President Trump does support or find acceptable?
The president absolutely supports peaceful protests. He supports the First Amendment. He supports the right of Americans to make their voices heard. He does not support violence of any kind. He does not support assaulting law enforcement officers who are simply trying to do their job.
So if there were peaceful protests on Saturday for the military parade, President Trump would allow that?
Of course the president supports peaceful protests. What a stupid question.
Isn't she delightful? What a delight.
Well,
I happen to recall that on January 6th, you were going to say it.
Well, I was just going to say, like, he doesn't approve of any violence or violence against law enforcement unless it was on January 6th. And that's what we pardoned on day one.
Yeah.
So, but I don't understand this. I can't be the only one. When I think of military parades, I think of Russia, I think of North Korea. I have these visuals of people saluting and doing things. And that's just not what I think of when I think of the U.S. And Senator Rand Paul said, we were always different than these images. And we were proud not to be that. And then you also think about the conversations about cutting waste. And here you've got, like, how much is this going to cost? $40 million.
On the low end, yeah.
Yeah.
On the low end, up to
Who
45
thinks,
million,
like,
yeah.
okay, let's cut, like, all the aid and the school lunches and all the good stuff, but let's throw a parade that harkens World War II propaganda and just throw the money that way. I can't keep up with all of this.
I think what's so distasteful about this is not only the cost, but the cuts that have happened with the Veterans Affairs. I mean, if you think about it, let's see, 6,000 veterans were fired due to budget cuts and layoffs. There are plans to remove up to 80,000 employees who provide support to veterans as well, and to spend $45 million and not and have these cuts, it just doesn't make sense. The best way to honor our troops is to make sure that our veterans are taken care of. That's
right.
the most important thing.
Well, I plan to peacefully protest on Saturday. I will go to the No Kings parade protest in Miami. And I am going to go protest, not because I hate my country, but because I love my country. Yeah. And because I think we need to stand up and speak up fearlessly against this authoritarian who wants to militarize our cities. This is not normal, and we as a country have got to lose our fear and have got to show that we will stand up for our democratic values. And look, I agree with you. $45 million he is spending on this parade, on top of the $135 million that he's spending sending the Marines and the National Guard to California. So that's almost $200 million right there at a time when DOGE directed the VA to cancel over 800 contracts that support everything from chemotherapy treatments for veterans to records digitalization. And when the 2,400 staff from the Veterans Administration were fired. So, you know, it's the hypocrisy. It's the fact that we never did it as America. We never had these type of parades because we are the biggest military force. And when you are the biggest and the baddest and the most powerful, you don't need to show up.
No.
Leave it for Kim Jong-un. Leave it for the dictator.
I'm curious, you know, here we have a guy who avoided Vietnam because of his bone spurs. No one, according to what I've read, no one in his family has ever served. His father, his grandfather, none of them have ever served. And yet he wants to have this big military. Are Americans going to respond positively to that fact or what?
Listen, I think Americans will want to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army, but how you do it matters. There's different traditions in America than there are in most of the world. Bastille Day in France, they do a military-style parade. VE Day in the UK, they do a military-style parade. But it
very much is a pro-democracy demonstration, as opposed to something that you would see on the streets of Moscow or on the streets in North Korea. And that's what's going to matter. Is this a bunch of tanks and troops walking up to Dear King at the end of the street? Or is it simply the Blue Angels flying over and us celebrating the American might and those who've risen their hand to serve? And I think nothing says more about a nation than how we treat those who served. And it drives me crazy. I feel like veterans become political pawns every election year.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're going to potentially spend $45 million on this when the VA continues to be backlogged, when right now there are veterans that are dealing with homelessness, with PTSD, with wounds of war that are not being properly cared for, that's really hard to compute. So I am all for any demonstration that's a celebration of the military. My concern is it going to be a celebration of a politician and a man?
Well,
and I think it's pretty clear that's what it's going to be.
So it would be interested to know that only 7 out of 50 congressional Republicans surveyed by Politico said that they were planning to attend. 7 out of 50. John Thune and Majority Whip John Barrasso, that guy who's always hanging behind him, he won't be going. He won't. Steve Scalise will not be going. Mike Johnson, the whatever he is.
Yeah, the speaker. He's not going?
Lindsey Graham, who happens to be a veteran.
Not attending.
He is not planning to attend. Tommy Tuberville, big right-winger, excused himself because he has the gubernatorial campaign and he hasn't got the time. And Mark Wayne Mullen said the date coincides with his anniversary, so he ain't going either.
Wow. You know what's
You know who is going? Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Oh, okay.
Byron Donalds and Elise Stefanik. They're all going.
Oh.
Well, and we should note that originally when Joe Biden was in office, he'd reserved this day, because it coincides with Flag Day and the anniversary of the U.S. Army, to have some sort of a display on the National Mall to celebrate the Army. But there's a lot of ways to do that. At that point, they were only planning to have about 300 soldiers and civilians. Now you're talking about thousands of troops in D.C. Sonny and I both lived there for some time.
And armored vehicles. That's going to rip
by the way,
up.
The mayor says it can't support tanks.
It's going to tear up DC.
Remember that Trump wanted to do this back in the first term. But back then, he actually had adults around him in the cabinet, people like 4-star generals, like John Kelly and Jim Mattis, head of DOD. Now he's got these sycophants who say yes to every harebrained idea that crosses his brain. And so, you know, on Saturday, I'm going to be honoring all of those who served. It's part of the reason I'm going to be protesting. And I'm also going to be remembering all of those veterans who are dealing with deportation orders, and all of those veterans whose aunties and abuelas and tias and and spouses are getting deported without due process.
So why do you think? I just gave you a list of the ones who are not going to go. Why do you think? I just thought of it. Why are they not going? What's the message they're giving to their
because
constituents?
they recognize what it looks like to be in a military parade.
No, it's the money spent, I think.
It's all of it. They're voting on this bill.
They're voting
that's
to kill Medicaid, and then they're going to spend money on this. Remember that.
They're canceling
How about the money to repair the streets of D.C.? That's projected to be over $100 million. Over $100 million just to fix the damage.
And keep in mind, we're having a military recruitment crisis right now. They're saying that the numbers are higher than ever, but it's because we lowered our expectations of how many people we'd recruit. Only 9% of U.S. civilians between 16 and 24 say they plan to join the military.
And if you're trans, you can't join the military anymore.
And showing displays of what the U.S. military is capable of, what service means, what it actually means, that's so powerful. But making it seem partisan, making it seem tied to a certain political agenda, or even controversial, is so counterproductive to trying to actually recruit people.
And then it's on his birthday. It's on his birthday. Only I will be interested if Stormy Daniels would jump out of a cake.